Leon, as our head of research, what can you tell us about degrowth? And to start with, what does degrowth even mean?
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to share some thoughts. I was reading a review article on degrowth. You might be able to hear the pages of that review article rustling in the background. So it's a review of, I think, one, two, three, four, five books which have been published on degrowth in the past couple of years. So it's a term that maybe you will or won't have heard of. It's almost certain that you will have heard of the term of economic growth. And as the review article makes clear, the way that our societies are run at the moment is very much in service to this idea of economic growth. That's the idea that every year there needs to be more economic activity than the year before. And if that doesn't happen, as is the case in the UK at the moment, you enter recession, which has all kinds of negative impacts. Now, I'm no economist, so I can't get too deep into the nitty gritty of recessions and growth cycles and so on. But my understanding at the moment is that, firstly, what's negative about a recession doesn't necessarily have to be negative in the same way that it is. What do I mean by that? Well, I just mean that the people who suffer under a recession at the moment tend to be people who are laid off, so workers who are sacked, people who might see their income and benefits sort of frozen in the case of the current economic crisis where inflation is eating away at people's incomes. And that's not a natural outcome of a recession. That's an outcome of the distribution of power within society and the fact that some people are able to sack other people if they want to continue making a profit, which might mean that those people who are sacked lose their livelihood, lose their jobs, and then left with no choice but to access what little state support might be available or to try and find another job, which isn't easy in a recession because jobs aren't available. Hopefully from that brief description you can already get a sense of like how nonsensical and kind of ludicrous that seems as a way of running an economy and running a society. And yet that model of growth recession in perpetual endless cycle has been the dominant way of organizing our economies for at least the last 50 years and probably longer, if we think about the history of capitalism as the economic system that we live in. So there were a lot of challenges to this idea of growth to begin with, this idea that we should just endlessly grow. And some of them were to do with the kinds of things that I mentioned about who has power and the fact that power isn't distributed equally in society anyway. The other thing that people often challenged about the growth-based model is that measuring growth, measuring higher economic output in general and average across a society doesn't measure well-being, it doesn't measure health. And in fact, you can have incredibly successful, highly growing economies such as the US that actually are full of tons of perverse and harmful outcomes, such as deeply embedded health inequalities, deeply embedded inequalities of all kinds, huge problems with mental health, lack of security and stability for people on an individual level. Finally, getting to my point, the reason that degrowth has become more of an issue of focus recently is the kind of the coming to a head of the various environmental crises and the social crisis that gives rise to those environmental crises recently. So like the climate crisis would being like the most notable one, but I guess in general, overconsumption of resources, fears about access to water, fears about access to land and so on, and food. Those crises have kind of spurred on critics of growth as a model for the economy. And what they've said is that actually we don't only need to not grow, we need to degrow. And that's where it starts to get a little bit complicated. But in short, it tends to mean that people with very, very, very high consumption lifestyles, which is a tiny fraction of the global population, are probably going to have to see their lifestyles change so that the resources that they consume disproportionately are better distributed globally. And actually, that won't just have benefits for the people whose lives get better elsewhere. It will also have benefits for those people themselves, because there's no actual correlation between your level of consumption and your happiness. In fact, once you reach a certain minimum level of stability or economic stability, like any more money than that doesn't actually improve your happiness and well-being. So that's part of this argument in favor of degrowth, aside from the fact that the planet's economic resources are finite, and yet the model of growth that we're currently following assumes or behaves as if resources are limitless, and we know that's not the case. So yeah, this review talks about 5 different books. I'm going to hopefully get hold of some of them, but I think it's a really interesting debate that's taking place among eco-socialists, I guess people would call themselves. It's a tricky one because I think there's been a criticism labeled at the environmental movement that it's too negative and anti-consumption, and that this can put people off in terms of the people that we might try and want to be organizing with, that it can seem like you're asking people to sacrifice or you're asking people to give things up, and that isn't a very effective way to win people over. I'd say what's positive about the degrowth approach is that you're actually promising a more fulfilling lifestyle, a more fulfilling experience of consumption, because it's less about this sort of short-term immediate hit of like a really enjoyable but ultimately costly form of consumption, thinking about like maybe, I don't know, a really sugary snack that like will make you feel great in that moment. It'll give you the hit of endorphins, but actually you eat too many of those, you're going to start to notice lots of ill effects in relation to your health. And if you were to switch that out, or if you were to limit that, it's not even about getting rid of it, stopping your consumption, it's just about moderating it. Your lifestyle, your sense of well-being is likely nearly always to be much better. So yeah, that's the big headline debate, I guess. Happy to say a bit more, about specific things if people are interested. But I'd recommend the article. Maybe we can put a link to it in the show notes. It might be behind a paywall, but it should be available if you don't read the London Review of Books too much, because I think they give you access to like at least a free article every month. I'm not sure, but yeah, we can link to it.
For sure, for sure. We'll share any links that you have for us and our audience. And yeah, this emphasis on growth and consumption is super, super insidious. And I'd say it's indoctrinated into our mindsets. But yeah, what do you guys think? What reflections do you guys have?
Well, I don't know if anyone said of the paradox of choice. Like the most simple explanation of this is that if you offer someone a chocolate bar and you give them a choice of three, they'll walk away and they go, great, I got a chocolate bar. Dope, I got a really good one. But if you, and this is a literal experiment, it's shown, it's done to many thousands of people. If you offer them a choice of 30 chocolate bars, then they pick one and they always come away feeling dissatisfied because you always feel like you didn't make the right choice. And one of the weird things about consumerism in the modern age is that it offers you the mirage of choice to give you a mirage of control over your own life and an ever expanding variety of options of the same thing, which is essentially, for instance, in the case of a chocolate bar, cocoa and sugar, right, and butter, whatever else is in it, a couple of key ingredients. And so I think in many regards, consumerism is awful and gauche and so forth. Having said all of that, to counterpose this, as someone who does communications, I can't see how degrowth is ever, it's not just a hard sell. I can't see how you could ever build a movement around it, how it could ever be executed realistically. Like it might be forced upon us purely by economic circumstances like wars in other parts of the world or economic recessions. But as you say, those recessions will always hit the poorest in the worst way. Whereas I think things that could add towards degrowth, like for instance, the movement for the 4-day working week, right? And ultimately, that movement should hopefully go for a 3-day working week and so forth. And this sort of move towards a society where we work far less, where we are obsessed with producing far less, means we will also consume far less. But it's a more positive framing. We all do think, as David Graeber called it, bullshit jobs. A lot of us do bullshit jobs. We spend a lot of time doing stuff that's not very important. I think management studies show that people can only be productive 5 hours a day. So things like that I can see as building around. What I'd like to ask anyone here is, can anyone get anyone on board with degrowth? Do you think we could genuinely build a movement around it or organize around it?
I think there's a potential strength in degrowth, which is really important, which is reframing the understanding of the economy. It's communicating this idea that what is called growth, when politicians are talking about growth as if it's just universally positive for everyone, doesn't necessarily benefit the average person, because it's felt for a long time that often on the left that we make economic arguments in the terms set by the right, or maybe even by the liberals. I think there's a potential power in just challenging even the basic idea that growth is fundamentally a good thing or something that we should be aiming for or necessarily benefits the average person. And I think even the idea that trying to sell degrowth would be trying to say to everyone, you have to have less of everything. I don't think that is a necessary outcome. Obviously, people will need to consume less, but I don't think we would need to base the movement around that. It actually makes me think about thinking about consumerism also as a structural rather than a cultural problem. And it's both, obviously, and both of those things are linked together. But I was talking recently actually to someone, they were just asking me what I did, and I was explaining what Breathe was. And they were saying, oh, well, how can you tackle the climate crisis when people are going out and buying 30 outfits from ASOS? every week. Like, you're going to have to stop them from doing that. And I was kind of saying that what we want to focus on is the reasons why that kind of behavior is happening. And it's not necessarily because people are just like fundamentally really narcissistic or really materialistic. It's kind of because what else is there to do with your time? Like, when I think about, like, when I have a day off work and I want to go and like do something nice, really the main option to me is like going to the shops, like having a look around, buying something nice, like make myself feel nice. There's not a lot else that we have in the society in terms of activities. And especially if you're like outside of city, maybe in a smaller town, some of the more kind of like active institutions and communities that used to exist that people might be more engaged in literally aren't there. So like, what you have to look at the range of ways that people have to participate in something that feels public or feels enjoyable. And consumerism is one of those things.
Yeah, I would totally back Una up on that. I mean, I think it's ridiculously easy to sell a different version of society than we have now because of how badly the current way of organizing ourselves leaves so many people. So you walk through Birmingham city centre on the weekend, there's tons of people, like, they seem like they're having a good time, but we know from the data on mental health, on like life satisfaction, job satisfaction, you were talking about bullshit jobs. We could go back to like sociology and the concept of anomie or alienation, and this idea that people are just not connected to the world around them in a way that's really fulfilling. And I think to sell people a version, and I mean, even to use the term sell is to fall into this trap of a very commercial language, but like to propose a version of society that's much more fulfilling, I think that's actually quite an easy sell, an easy proposition. I think most people will get on board with it very quickly if you're able to persuade them that it's possible. Because I think the biggest obstacle is actually one of imagination. It's people have been so well conditioned into thinking, no, the limits of your horizon are you're going to go out and get completely smashed on a Friday and a Saturday, and then you're going to go back to work all week. And then at certain times of year, like the festival of consumption that is Christmas, you'll be able to like overindulge in certain things. And that's it. Don't you dare dream of having experiences which involve you connected to people in a non-commercial way, or your job is never going to be so satisfying that you're going to not need to go out on a Friday night and drink to forget what you've been doing all week. I genuinely feel like it's just below the surface, people's kind of preparedness to accept and yearn for that alternative way of life. And I think that's what you sell with degrowth. I don't think you have to be like, oh no, everything you've got now is going to go. It's like, think of what you could have. It's in a way, it's growth, right? It's growth of personality. It's growth of the connections between us. It's growth of value in yourself and in your life.
I would tend to agree. I just don't think, in terms of from a pure communication standpoint, degrowth is the framing for it. I think degrowth is an outcome of creating a world that is better and more fulfilling, that is joyful and beautiful. And when you look at, for instance, the cultural exports of the United Kingdom, festivals is one. Like, Americans particularly have copied British festivals and European festivals. Football is probably the biggest cultural export of Britain now. And ultimately, there's a constant like attempt to package these experiences and to sell them and to ruin them and squeeze something awful out of them. But ultimately, it's very hard to break down the purity of these things, which are a bunch of people come together and share an experience and do something fun together. And it doesn't have to be merely escapism and getting blitzed, though that often is part and parcel of it. And what I say by that is, I think, yes, I agree with you. There's an appetite for a more beautiful, wonderful world. I just think if we were pushing for it in a world that had degrowth, we would say, let's work less, let's create more. And when we talk about create more, it'd be create more space, physical space, emotional space, time for each other, things that we can do together. Because as you say, we do shopping as a default because it gives you that little dopamine hit and it's something to do with each other, and no one's above it, no one's better than it, and there should be no sort of moral judgment on it. It's just that provided with other options, I'm pretty sure, and again, I think we've seen the data on it, and anecdotally, I can certainly say this, people would take other options. They would do other things.
I definitely share those sentiments. And I was kind of, well, while you were speaking, Leon, it kind of made me think about how, like, what do we have to do that isn't so commercial, that isn't just about going out and buying, right? Like, what are the options? So I also invite you guys and the team and our audience to also like share thoughts and ideas and actually actively be creative on like how we can spend our time and how we can create that. Because I guess also on actually pursuing the things that is going to create a world that is heading towards the direction of degrowth without branding it in such a way. Part of doing that is finding community and doing things that aren't necessarily so focused around consumption and growth. Because yeah, like I think about it and I'm like, when I was growing up, there was no other option but to go to the shops with my mates and like buy something from Starbucks and some stupid thing from Superdrug that I didn't need, but I thought I wanted. By doing things, people, I feel like, without realizing, start to reframe the way they see the world and start to reframe how they wish to live, and therefore start to be creative in anything that would then again lead to something such as degrowth, to less consumption, just ends up happening, right? Because of who you're around and what you're doing.
One thing that makes me think of, in my other job when I'm not working for Breathe, I work for an organisation where we take like donations of baby items, secondhand clothes and stuff that people need, and then we make these baby boxes and we send them out to people who are seeking asylum, don't have anything they need for their new baby. And that's something we've always said, that like we shouldn't exist. People seeking asylum, everyone who is in this country who's going to have a new baby should have access to the resources they need to get the things they need. There should be a scheme like there is in Scotland where everyone gets a baby box with everything they need. So we would love to not do the work that we do, but we do it. And what we've said is like, if we didn't have to divert these things to target them at like people who really, really need them, we'd love to just be like a recycling project. So people come swap their things, and like that's something I would do with my free time if I wasn't tired from working and earning money and I wasn't worried about surviving. I would totally go and just spend my time taking donations, sorting them, folding clothes, meeting people from the community, because people come and like swap things. And that kind of project feels like it should be easy, and in our current society is so difficult to pull off, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a real uptick in the experience economy of late in Britain, selling like events, activities that are, you know, something that you just consume as a one-off. So escape rooms have become really popular, like these events where people dress up as zombies and you have to chase them around the town, and like murder mysteries, things like that. And also I would say the university sector, everything that the universities are providing, you can probably get in different ways without going to university because the availability of information online. But there's something about the experience of going to university that is uniquely valued. And I think that's partly to do with the experience economy. And I think that the rising experience economy speaks on the one hand to the poverty of like experiences that people have organically, because those have all been closed off by the various attacks on communities and attacks on the institutions and organizations that hold communities over the past 20 years that we've talked about. And it also at the same time speaks to people's like deep yearning for something to do that's like entertaining and fun. So I wrote a piece recently about how there's not a lot you can do apart from consume food or clothing, basically. And on the margins now, experiences as well. But once in Leeds, there was a Capture the Flag organised in the city centre, which was just totally free. There was like maybe 200 people played, and the police like lost their shit. They were totally befuddled. They were like bamboozled about what was going on. They were like, why are you like, they shouted at me for standing in the doorway of a church, because like they were like, well, we can't tell them off for playing Capture the Flag in town. That's like not illegal, but we're not happy that this is going on. This is unsanctioned. No one's profiting from this. If they're profiting, we're not aware of it. And there's something about the need to break down those cultural barriers about what kinds of experiences people are expected to have and feel comfortable accessing, because I think it is a bit, not everyone's gonna be able to just like play a game in a public space and feel comfortable with that. They might be afraid of getting told off by the police for standing in a church doorway, or they might just be a bit unused to that kind of interaction. But I feel like different experiments, different activities like that can help to chip away at the expectation that all we've got to do in public space is consume, and can satisfy people's yearning, which I think everyone has, for like those collective moments that you get from watching a football game together.
I love that you mentioned Capture the Flag, and so I'm going to try and summate some of these ideas into something that might be useful for us as a movement to think about as potential organisers and activists. As so often, I refer to the history of activism in my lifetime, and in the late noughties, or whatever we call that period, the 2000s, there were many sort of activity-based elements to activism that were just done. There was regularly in certain places Capture the Flags organized just in the city centre, just because it was something to do, and hundreds of people would join in randomly. But there wasn't just that. There were drumming groups, singing groups, there were walking and orienteering groups, and the orienteering groups particularly played games in the countryside to like teach you how to learn how to read a map and chase each other across the countryside. There were often pop-up community kitchens. People would just do these on street corners. They would do them in local parks. A particularly famous organisation was called Food Not not bombs. And I think when the movement in about 2013, 14, 15 started to move towards electoralism through the SNP, the Green Party, and later the Labour Party, a lot of elements of just activity, just being with people, doing something fun that was fulfilling, were kind of lost. And these are things that could be revivified because, you know, being part of a community kitchen that pops up and it feeds refugees or homeless people, it feeds people in the area, and it's an excuse to chat to them about maybe a political cause or just stuff, you know, was wonderful to be part of. And it can be tied in towards a campaign of fighting for free time. Let's produce less, let's have more free time. And with that free time, let's fill it with these things that we do, that we love, that bring us together. And I think we can then model the kind of things that we want to see in the world by doing them. You know, these are just suggestions for whoever's listening to think about, but it's often tying the theoretical and a good idea to a real world activity is often the challenge. And so that's a few suggestions for people to think about.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And like, we have our 4-day working week, or at least we have no one working past 4 days, right? Technically, that is because at the end of the day, like, we know that we always end up working a little bit overtime. But I guess I think our next step now is to organize a capture the flag at some point somewhere. I think that'll be good fun, perhaps something for one of our community organizers to do, who knows? And also something for anyone else to do, because if you have the time, if you have the opportunity, and if you have the friends to help you out, then you might as well, right? Well, it's been lovely hearing from you all, and thank you, Leon, for introducing the idea of degrowth. Make sure to check out our socials, especially our TikTok, where you can hear directly from our community organisers who are doing incredible work on the ground. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel, and keep up to date with our future episodes. Empower, Love and Rage from the Breathe Network.